everybody. Can you hear us? Mics are on. All right. It's a pleasure to be with you here. As Ron said, we've known each other for some time. It's the first time I've had an opportunity to speak at Grid Connects, but we were talking about it last night. I think I spoke at events of yours going back almost 2 decades, so nice to be connected again. And good to be with all of you today. And we are going to have an interesting and far-ranging conversation about the whole future of mobility, how it relates to the electric grid system, and we'll be digging into that. And let me introduce my Q&A discussant, Julia Steyn, who really has an interesting perspective on all the changes that are happening in transportation and mobility by dint of her background and one new announcement, which we're going to talk about today. So Julia has been a longtime participant in the transportation world. She started her career as a banker and an analyst at Carney and then Goldman Sachs, and went from Goldman Sachs to Alcoa, from Alcoa to General Motors, where she was doing corporate development, but then ultimately ran their whole urban mobility business, including a really innovative new business that she launched at GM called Maven, which is vehicle sharing, and we can talk about the importance of shared vehicles to the whole revolution that's happening in electrification, because we see those things as being related. And she left General Motors beginning of this year, I guess. And since then, we've gotten to know each other, and she's been involved in a lot of interesting different projects. She's been an advisor to McKinsey. She's on a board of a public company in the UK in transportation called First Group. And today has announced that she has become the new CEO of a micromobility company called Bolt Mobility. So we're going to hear all about that as well. And Bolt Mobility gets its name not because of the connection to the electric world, but because of its co-founder, Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world. So with that, now let me say a little bit also about my perspective on these issues, because Julie and I will be kind of going back and forth here. So as Ron said, I've been working in this space for 2 decades, had a strategy consultancy that worked with more than 100 big companies, sold that business, and then started Broadscale with the similar aim of continuing to accelerate innovation around energy, transportation, and industry through a different approach. We've got a network of corporates, some big utilities, some big oil and gas companies, some big industrial OEMs, and we source strategic investments, partnerships, and acquisitions for them at the Broadscale group in our corporate network. And then over the last 3 or 4 years, we've also developed a network of family offices and high net worth individuals, and we are investing actively in some of the most interesting deals we see in energy and transportation. Most recently, for example, we invested in Proterra, the electric bus company. We'll talk a little bit about the electrification of municipal fleets, because that's a critically important area, and I know you guys have heard from Proterra's CEO, Ryan Popple, in the past. So let's jump in, Julia. Your perspective, having all these different experiences, big companies, now running a new small company. I'm going to start with kind of a big framework, and I'd like you to tell us if you think this framework makes sense based on your perspective. But at Broadscale, when we look at the intersections of the energy system and transportation and mobility, we really see 4 important themes. And we're going to mention all 4, and we'll probably focus on 2 that are most relevant to this audience. And that is, the future of transportation is first going to be electric. We believe that pretty strongly. Second, it's going to be connected because of all the digital technology and sensors and AI and ML that we've been talking about. Third, it's likely to be shared so that vehicles, whether they're micromobility scooters and mopeds, or cars, or trucks even, or buses, or other larger vehicles, will increasingly be shared utilization. And then last, and as we all know, maybe most exciting, these vehicles will ultimately be autonomous. But again, electric, connected, shared, and autonomous. And this is a framework that we didn't invent, but it's been around there, and we see it really coming to fruition, and we're going to kind of dig into some of the themes in each of these areas. So first, from your perspective, does that rubric make sense from all the things you've been seeing, the different perspectives? And then as part of your answer, tell us a little bit about Bolt Mobility and why you took on this new challenge.
Well, first of all, thank you for such a generous introduction. When I reminisce about my career, really a good portion of the past decade, I have seen different perspectives and how the mobility space evolved. And again, I've seen it from the perspective as part of corporate development and part of the corporate VC as an investor through the deals that we've made with GM, both in autonomous front and we invested in Lyft. Now, I've seen it also from the perspective of an operator starting up a new company. Now I'm seeing it from a much broader perspective from the municipalities. And there are a couple of themes that you're spot on. And the interesting part, those themes about shared and electrification and connected and autonomous, they're not standalone pillars. They're really interconnected right now. What we've seen in the past decade, let's just put some of these benchmarks around. Nobody believed in automotive space, and I was right there with the front seat view, that Tesla could do what they did. And they did. They broke the ranks of automotive with a new brand and with a product that was electric. And frankly, the whole industry had to, in some way, follow suit. With the development of what became a new way to get a taxi, which is what Uber and Lyft are, but it's mobile first, and it kind of creates a very new customer experience, it became a thing. And this is what put really the shared on the map. Meanwhile, I think what is really happening on the consumer front, we all live in big cities, and it is very, very challenging with the congestion, and people talk ad nauseum about it, but we see it every day. So the cars has stopped being a good answer. So again, in the past, I remember speaking with the rhetoric like, well, the car used to be freedom that all of us strived for. I have a 12-year-old. He has no desire to get a license, and he probably never will. My family is based in New York. And this is the trend that is not necessarily driven by a whole bunch of automotive guys or a whole bunch of tech guys. This is the trend that's driven by the consumer. And another thing that throughout my whole experience, what I've seen, and again, I had a privilege of doing incredible things in automotive space and really tried to reinvent the car sharing platform holistically from ground up. But it wasn't really answering a very important question, which is that last 50 yards. And so this is, again, now we're seeing over the past, literally.
So not even the last mile anymore.
Not even the last mile. It really needs to solve the last 50 yards. So we've seen half of the football field. And we see in the space, or at least I see in the space, again, through multiple lenses, that the consumer needs that answer, the businesses need its answer. So micromobility is a real thing, and I believe it's here to stay very firmly. Is it going to be here to stay in the current model? I don't think so, but we can talk about that. But you asked me why I joined Bolt Mobility. This is why I joined the Micromobility company, to really put my mark on what micromobility can look like and how it can actually serve society. And I think where micromobility industry needs to be challenged, it needs to go, is move away from being a toy-like product that's kind of fun, but it's actually not helpful to the cities because you've seen everywhere all the scooters that are not really useful for anything else except for really a fun ride, and they pile up. And I do understand why the municipalities are really examining it. But what the industry needs to be challenged towards is to be a real solution partner and integrate in the whole city infrastructure. When that last 50 mile is connected to the public transport, it's connected in a way how the curbs are really done in the cities. And also it needs to be useful for businesses. I think micromobility is a phenomenal opportunity for deliveries that nobody's utilizing because, again, the products were not designed that way. But where the industry can go, I think, is massive. And it's very exciting how fast we are creating it.
So give us some quick facts about Bolt, just so people know how many cities are you in, what's your focus area, maybe something about the technology itself and how you're dealing with the charging issues and things like that.
So Bolt, first of all, is really a technology stack company. We have designed a product as well that is very durable and really suitable for deliveries. You can look on our website, and it's very unique. You cannot mistake it for anything. And we're right now in 16 cities in the US and abroad, grew pretty quickly in the past year and operated the networks. Where we're focusing the business is really redefining what micromobility can be with the thought partnerships with the cities as well as the business-to-business offerings.
Interesting. One of the things that we've seen in this last 6 years that we've been focused on both the grid and now even more on transportation as a connector because of electrification is this point that you mentioned about the importance of the consumer.
Yes.
You know, the last panel we were talking about grid infrastructure and software needed. These are not conversations you hear at dinner parties, right? Or talking to our kids about the future of how they're going to look at engaging. And it's because I think of those dramatic changes and the fact that I ask people, you know, transportation is on everyone's mind because we all have to deal with it every day. Whereas energy for most of us is back of mind, right? We want to set it and forget it and not have to deal with it. So let's talk about sort of the first interface, which I think is what kind of vehicles are people going to be moving around in? And presumption we have, again, is that these vehicles will be electric, whether we're talking about micromobility, regular passenger vehicles, or even municipal buses and things like that, maybe even aircraft, because we increasingly are going to see electric aircraft. What do you think are the key barriers that we need to overcome to adoption? Is it about infrastructure, EV charging? Is it about cost? Is it about having enough models? I mean, GM, where you worked, has announced many different electric models. So have most of the other automotive OEMs. But still today, only about 2% of new car sales are fully electric in the US. Where do you see that going, and what needs to happen for electrification really to become a mass market reality?
I had a chance to actually run probably the largest electric car fleet at GM, and it was really a phenomenal experience from multiple perspectives. I think it's very important to understand that electric vehicle is incredibly well suited for the shared applications, and also as a base for autonomous, right? So I think it's rightfully that you see more and more broader electrified models out there. And,
I mean, you couldn't really have autonomous without electric, could you?
It really helps. You can do a hybrid, but it really helps with all the tech that goes into autonomous. But the important part about it is, like, the electric vehicles, they're also more durable, and they have less of the footprint. So this is a right consumer solution to begin with. And so that's why you see how everybody is trying to move towards sort of the right product in the mobility space that's electrified. However, having said that, the biggest challenges to do it in a shared context has really been the infrastructure, because a lot of the debates about electric infrastructure has been how to satisfy an individual consumer and how do you do the infrastructure from coast to coast to enable this freedom of movement. But majority of the trips actually happen within the cities and the municipal areas. And for the shared mobility as well, whether it's cars or it's micromobility, it's also within the urban centers. And it presents all kinds of issues that I'm sure everybody in this room knows much more about than even I do day to day. But this is what we encountered, that to have a fast charging, which is really necessary because all the shared mobility solutions, the game for economics is the utilization. So if you cannot turn the asset, you're not making a profit. So in order for them to actually be efficiently charged or plugged in or anything, you need to establish how to do it within a city. And this is a big debate because it's very difficult. It's not always clear who kind of owns that last solution that can be built and that infrastructure that you can either plug in the car on the micromobility device. For Bolt Mobility, we actually moved to swappable batteries because, again, that's a lot easier to do, and you can actually distribute them with a much smaller footprint in many locations around the cities. So it's a important debate, and more people that come to the table with the solutions between the policymakers, between the utilities, between the local real estate, it's really, really going to help the cause. And frankly, I strongly believe that we're at the pivotal point where it's not even an option anymore. This needs to be solved.
And one of the things about electric transportation that's interesting, I mean, obviously I think most people in this room know that transportation is still the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It also provides an opportunity, obviously, for utilities to find a source of new load growth as other areas are diminishing. So what do you think, and there are a number of utility folks here, utilities should be doing to encourage electrification further? And maybe even during the Q&A, we would like to hear some questions about challenges that any of you are finding in terms of working with vehicle manufacturers, whether it's the big guys and the OEMs of passenger vehicles or micromobility companies, which are, I think my understanding is all the micromobility companies are fully electric.
They're fully electric, yes.
So there could be real opportunities, but there are challenges. So for example, we've seen a company that's trying to aggregate all of the different brands in micromobility to do charging infrastructure in conjunction with cities and utilities. But it's very hard to do because every city's got a different regulatory context. The utilities are obviously different. And so whether it's for micromobility or level 2 or high-speed charging for passenger vehicles or depot fleet charging for buses. I mean, that's going to need to happen, and that's not something that anybody has yet fully figured out. Kind of charging as a service, perhaps. I mean, what do you see as the intersection between the mobility folks and the power sector folks, many of whom are here?
I think the important part is usually to create that solution that's usable for a mobility company, multiple jurisdictions need to come to the table to do it. And that's the reality and very unfortunate part about this. I think if the utilities had an ability to actually everywhere fully deliver the system and it would be part of their charter, then I think it obviously would go a lot faster. Especially the utilities have to be partners in this because no operator knows the grid. We don't know how to overwhelm where to put the charging station. So like that data and knowledge is vital, but also the ability to actually put capital to work in order to deliver those depots. I think that's been, in my experience, the biggest tumbling block.
Since you mentioned Tesla, let's jump in and I want to get your quick perspective on some of the recent announcements. So the new Tesla vehicle, put aside the glass, whether it broke or not, I mean, and just put that in context of the other recent announcements. I mean, Ford made their announcement around the Mustang, but it sort of looks completely different. Tesla came up with this super futuristic pickup / SUV / spaceship.
I will not comment on the design.
No. But where do you think we are in terms of these announcements? How real are they? How much capital is going into them from what you know and are observing? And are we basically on an inevitable march toward a fully electrified transportation sector?
I would actually take it from an Amazon perspective. I think the Amazon and what they're doing with a delivery-focused electric truck is going to be a lot, it will have a lot of relevance because, again, what is happening from the consumer standpoint, we all expect the packages to be delivered on a daily basis, and I order and I have it delivered. Well, it doesn't miraculously happen, so it actually puts more strain and more congestion in the system. So I think the Amazon, it's an incredibly smart move to really invest into the electrified solution for the deliveries. And again, I really strongly think that micromobility will also be part of that for the last 50 yards.
Even on delivery?
Even on delivery.
And will that mean that micromobility encompasses even things like drones? Or because a lot of people are talking about maybe the last 50 yards or 100 yards or half a mile, it'll be a truck to a certain space and then maybe it'll be delivered by drone.
Maybe. We now we need a different conference on the airspace regulations. Look, we're going to see an evolution of the right product for that 50 mile, for that last 50 yards. And I think we're in the beginning of this journey. It's going to evolve, and I think we're going to get very creative in the industry. I suspect so.
And how much, I mean, the other trend, as you said, I mean, Amazon's a great example, but there's also all of these, food delivery and other kind of new delivery services coming out. Will those be competitors, customers? Or do you see your end users ultimately being average consumers or also delivery folks?
I definitely see a role micromobility in the business-to-business context. And again, delivery, I think, is one example. That's another thing. How many people here don't order something to eat? And how does that get delivered? I guarantee you it really rarely gets delivered in a car. So it's in some kind of mobility solution, probably not the most effective one. I think, obviously, again, the whole closed networks and the transportation systems is another fascinating area because look at how big college campuses are. Look at how big football stadiums are. Anybody who went to US Open understands the need for some kind of solution to get from the front gate to actually the main arena. So I think thoughtful planning of the holistic solution for the mobility and how it works in the closed environment as well is going to be important.
And then what about, someone was just telling me about Washington, D.C. just kicked out some of their micromobility players, and one of the reasons was they weren't being equitably distributed throughout the city so that people in different neighborhoods with different socioeconomic backgrounds could get access to these new solutions. I mean, how are you seeing the industry working with the city and other government authorities to make sure that these new resources will be available kind of broadly to folks?
You have to work with the cities, and you have to be a thought partner to the cities of how your micromobility or car solution or any other solution fits into it. And I think we've seen over the past years many unfortunate examples when it wasn't a collaborative process, and it didn't move the industry forward. It just created tension where it could have been a thoughtful solution. So I'm a big proponent of, again, being able to combine and rationally figure out how we actually use the curb in the cities, how we actually work together with the public transportation, because ultimately it's the people movement and the goods movement that you need to optimize. So that's not about individual brands, it's not about individual companies, it's actually making mobility what it should be for the common good.
Now, how about the relationship between micromobility and some of the TNCs, transportation network companies? Let's call it just Uber and Lyft for short, as you mentioned. Some of them are getting into micromobility. I guess maybe both of them have. But what do you see the relationship is going to look like going forward? And then connected to that is the pressure that folks like Uber and Lyft are under, and maybe also folks in the micromobility sector, to demonstrate better unit economics so that they're getting towards gross margin profitability. Certainly we as investors want to see that. How do those factors all come in?
I think obviously all of these industries are going through a natural process of growing up. And I just, again, want to remind you that most of these companies didn't exist a decade ago, and some of these micromobility companies didn't exist 19 months ago. So I think we're going to see a lot of evolution of what the product is. We're going to see a lot of evolution on it has to be on the business model, because rightfully the investors need to see how the path to making money. And these are important challenges to have. Again, when you think about automotive industry, it kind of grew up and put all the supply chains, everything together, but it took over 100 years. So we're right now in the very beginning of something that I think is here to stay for the consumer, just given where our life is going with mobile first and the seamless integration of everything in our daily life, from voice technology to the phone to basically desire that I access everything through just one piece of equipment. So I think, again, my only answer to it is stay tuned. It's evolving, and we're going to evolve with it, I think.
And how important is the form factor that Bolt has chosen to your future? Do you see yourselves looking at different form factors, different kind of transportation modes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, again, I feel very good that our product today is differentiated. And again, it lasts 2 years. We've been running our scooters, electric scooters, for the past year, and they're still there. We keep running them. So I think that's pretty good versus some of the average life. But it's always an evolution. The design of this is also an evolution. And again, the good news for micromobility, to redesign it, it's not like trying to redesign a car platform. So from that standpoint, I think the evolution is going to happen much faster.
Let's talk a little bit about autonomous, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So please get your questions ready if you have them. It is sort of the lodestar at the end there. If you have electric and shared and connected vehicles, maybe we can get to autonomous. And even on the profitability standpoint, you hear companies like Uber saying that eventually, they won't have a labor cost to deal with. Where do you think we are on that roadmap to getting to level 4, level 5 kind of autonomy? We have some of the technology already. We have regulatory hurdles. We have hurdles in terms of people, figuring out how you're going to have sort of the combination of fully autonomous vehicles with human-driven cars, which could be the biggest problem. And where do you sort of think we're going to see the first instances of real autonomy in application?
Well, first of all, I strongly believe autonomous is going to happen. I think a lot of the debate is sort of how fast and in which applications. But the fact that the cars are actually running and they're working, they still have to evolve to really do what, to have the same experience as if you were driving it yourself. But it's really important to, I think, put them on the roads and work and evolve. It's a capital-intensive process. Obviously, there are different approaches. So what sort of comes first? Do you do platooning of trucks in the lanes? Because, again, technically, that's a simpler solution than kind of getting the cars running around the city with a complicated infrastructure. And I think, different companies are going to get at it a different way, and all of these, all of the spectrum is going to be moved forward. I'm not an engineer, so I don't have a perspective on the tech in the autonomous, but I see this being a reality, and I think the next challenge for the autonomous guys is truly start having a revenue-producing models. And I know Waymo is doing that, and Cruise is on the way to do that. So those are, I think, who combine the commercial application and the consumer-forward application are definitely ahead in the market.
I mean, one of the things we see is there are a number of companies that are taking approaches that I would describe as incrementally important, but not going for the whole thing. So they're taking fixed routes and making them autonomous, companies like Mobility and Optimus and others, and they're testing that out to get people comfortable with it, dealing with some of the regulatory issues by maybe avoiding the, open streets. I have to ask you about Cruise, because of course you were at General Motors when Cruise was acquired, and I know you can't talk in too much detail, but we think it's one of the most interesting, for everybody in the room, instances of the interaction between a startup and a corporate.
Sure.
Because General Motors acquired Cruise, a leading autonomous vehicle technology company, but then did something we've never really seen, which is they reopened the capital stack and had SoftBank and a competitor, Honda, invest in the company, right? So by doing so, you might say, well, gosh, if they already owned it, why would they do that? But according to the Wall Street analysts, the company's now, independently could be valued at almost $20 billion, whereas General Motors' overall valuation is maybe double that, or in the range. So, I mean, that was a super interesting deal. As a corp dev M&A person, without commenting specifically on the deal, what's notable about that for you?
I think you just outlined it all. I think it was a really successful way to have two businesses that do integrate with each other, but on the other side, they're still pretty different in terms of the consumer-facing model, to have their own freedom and opportunities to grow. And I think General Motors has done a really, really smart play there.
And is there a roadmap there for future collaborations between startups and big incumbents where it doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing acquisition and figuring out how to coexist? Because one of the things we've seen is once companies get acquired, they frequently have brain drain, folks leave, and the value of the acquisition may be diminished.
Well, without GM lens on it, just purely as a deal person, and I spend a lot of time on corporates, that's the biggest challenge. When you acquire something new that is far off from your sort of main business, how do you really work with this? Do you fully integrate? Do you leave it separate? And how do you really deal with people interactions to get the most value out of it? And I think, again, when it's done well, there's such examples like Cruise. When it's done fully, then it's basically really, you don't get a whole lot of value from it. So I think it's kind of on an individual basis how you approach.
Yeah, it's super interesting. All right, let's open it up for questions. I don't know if there's a mic anywhere. Yes, right here, and then we'll go here. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi, yeah, so thank you. I mean, I think electric vehicles, one of the most exciting things besides the fact that it's a better car, but is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. But I'm curious to hear the other co-benefit is about air pollution. So Julia, are you seeing that in your conversations, or did you at General Motors, of how much was reducing air pollution in cities a driver?
I can't quote you statistics, nor should I really speak on behalf of General Motors, but this is a big factor because, again, the cities are inundated with the congestion. So what's the better of two evils, congestion or congestion with less emissions? And I think it's clear that congestion with less emissions is better. It would be better not to have congestion, and so that's why all of the other mobility solutions are coming into play to really assist in that.
And I would say that sharing is the other component
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
critical to air quality and congestion. And a little plug for a company we're also an investor in called VIA. The New York City Department of Transportation, TLC, did a study this summer that showed that the Uber and Lyft utilization rates were below 50%. What does that mean? Uber and Lyft drivers spend more than half their time empty, driving around looking for rides, partly driven by that business model, which is ride-based, whereas shared vehicle approaches have utilizations that are 70 to 80%. Obviously, you're reducing congestion, pollution, and impact. Other questions? Yes?
You mentioned about 4 dimensions, but the 5th dimension, that's the aerial transportation. The passenger drones and delivery drones are fast emerging. In 10 years down the line, a sizable percentage of city transportation is going to be aerial. And how do we charge all those flying objects is going to be the main challenge for the grid operators.
Yeah, no, I think that air-based transportation fits within the scheme of being connected and shared. In fact, we just saw a company out of Germany, which is super cool, called Lilium. You should look them up on their website. You can see they're flying electric shared vehicle. It will be an electric air taxi with a safety driver until they have full autonomy and 5 seats. And their use case is we want to get people from downtown Manhattan to JFK in 7 minutes for $70. And that's where they're trying to head within a few years. Other questions? I saw some other hands. Oh, we have one in the back, and then we'll get to Steve. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. We were going to talk a little more about connected and 5G. But.
Without giving you any engineering kind of answer, I have to only assume that 5G is better for latency, so it will be a good thing.
I mean, I think as far as we're talking to folks in the telco world, they obviously see 5G as a critical component of an autonomous future. And even now, I mean, connected vehicles are delivering important information, vehicle to grid. We are working with, one of our partners is Panasonic. They're doing a lot with state transportation authorities that want to gather and collect data on vehicles, whether they're fully electric or not, to have more information to reduce congestion. Even look at new ways of doing toll collection, right? Because we all know tolls are going fully electronic. You can do it based on actual mileage traveled and so on. Yes.
So help me understand a little more the practical side of your business model, the Volt business model. I'm sure I'm totally off base, but I have in my head, you know, Union Station is 400 or 500 yards from here, so it's close, but almost not walking distance.
It's cold today.
Well, and trains are stopping there every 20 or 30 minutes with hundreds of people coming out, and the cab lines and the Uber lines are all over the place, right? So I assume there's a business model in there somewhere, but am I off base, or how do you see that evolving into a more micro-mobility scooter kind of?
Well, what you're saying is absolutely basic, right? Most of the trips, actually, there are multiple people who did research on this, so I'm not quoting anybody in particular, but most of the trips that people do around the city is actually so short that they're below practicality for what the ride-sharing companies need to do. And I think, Union Station to here is a perfect example. So for a movement of people, that's a great application of it because it's sort of just the right distance where it might be faster to just come up to a scooter, open it with your phone, and 5 minutes later versus 10 minutes later, you're where you need to be. I think different applications for that is, again, for delivery application. So all of the guys who are running right now on the sort of the bikes around the city or something else, which is also a micro-mobility solution, there's probably something more elegant to be done there.
Okay. Any other questions? I have one more. So as you think about this new adventure that you're going on in micromobility, what lessons do you take away from your experience running Maven, which was a pioneer in doing shared vehicles on a larger scale?
I think it's a very good question. The most important thing, I would say that you have to get the product-consumer fit right and really get to work with a business model that ultimately you believe is sustainable. And I think another thing is to enable sort of those noble goals, it's always a form of partnerships, whether partnerships of thought with whom you're trying to serve, which in our case is cities, partnership of thought with the consumers, partnership of thought with basically your business partners. So I've learned that. And I also learned that you're going to see in this industry, in the mobility industry, fast evolution. And you shouldn't be scared of it. You should just embrace it and go for it because anything from product changes to how you decide to get the right business fit into the new environment, that's now the matter of months, not the matter of years. And the consumer sees that on their side. And everybody else, by the way, is evolving around you. So not being afraid of that and just be firm in defining what the industry should be and not being shy about it.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you very much. Please join me thanking Julia.
Thank you.